I'm back today with the hottest and latest about Saito network. I actually had you guys on my channel a few months back with David, who is the second co-founder. And today I'm joined by Richard, who is the other co-founder. So really interesting stuff. I think the interview that we did back then, a lot of people actually came to me and said like, hey, this is really interesting, even though it was very techy, but it's still very interesting. It's very novel, very unique, very innovative, which is sometimes rare in the crypto space. But the feedback was really great. So I'm really excited to get you back on, hear updates over the past 6 months since we last talked. Thanks for doing this, Richard. How is everything going on your end?
I mean, it's great. There's a real buzz around the project. Community is really picking up and is really active. So as with any kind of startup / new project, there's always way too much to get done and never enough time to do it. But I think we're all feeling really positive at the project, just mostly because of, that real positive community feeling we're getting recently and people starting to contribute and grow what we're doing, and can't have anything better than that as a founder.
Yeah, that's definitely a good sign that you guys are on the right track. I've also seen more traction on social media. Definitely growth there. There's also a couple of things like the Web3 grant that you guys received that might have contributed to that. So we can talk about this in a second. But first of all, I think it would be nice to get a little bit of context on your background. We just figured out that you speak basically fluent German, even though you're Australian. You have a background in philosophy, mathematics, but also in blockchain. So maybe you can share a little bit of your journey in the tech space and how it all led to kind of like the creation of Saito.
Cool. So yeah, I think there's a pretty obvious through line, and it helps give context to the project as well. So like you said, I studied actually mathematics and philosophy, which was kind of funny because that meant that when I first saw blockchain, I was like, oh, finally something really useful that I studied, like that my studies are really useful to something new and exciting. You know, the combination was right there. But I'd been working in tech in the startup scene in Beijing for a few years when Bitcoin came along. And I got involved with David, my co-founder, and some other people we kind of knew from the tech scene in the early Bitcoin meetups and so forth around 13, 14. David was a little bit earlier than I was. And back then, I was super interested in this new technology. And I think, there's a bunch of us, it was very much more like a Linux meetup or something back then, geeks geeking out about an obscure technology that they liked. And you had all sorts of people. You had people who are now kind of the classic Bitcoin maxis, they were in it for free sovereign money. But you also had a lot of people just interested in what this could build. And in essence, the original Web3 crowd. So a lot of people right in the early days were looking at, oh, look, this autonomous network, you could use it for sending messages and things, sort of unstoppable messaging and that kind of thing. And a lot of the early apps were stuff to do that kind of thing. You'd send a message, you'd write on Satoshi's wall or that kind of thing. And that was really supremely interesting to me all along. Kind of got the money thing and didn't object to it, but was also really interested in this sort of autonomous network, all the things you could do with that, and seeing things like Facebook and Google growing and eating the internet. This seemed like a really interesting alternative. But being in the Beijing Bitcoin scene, we were kind of there with a front row seat for the kind of the block size debate, which turned into block size war, which turned into that community just tearing itself apart. And that was all around, how big blocks should be, which was a question because, obviously bigger blocks meant more data, more throughput with the basic Bitcoin design, but it also would make it harder and harder and eventually impossible for the volunteer nodes that operate BTC now to keep going. And Saito really evolved out of that space and discussion. David, the co-founder, was really active in those discussions and debates, trying to point out what he saw the critical issues were. And, we kind of watched our friends stop talking to each other and people getting angrier and angrier, and, BCH split off and then that split into BSV, et cetera, et cetera. And I think around 2016, 17, David started thinking about the ideas that he was bringing into those discussions with Bitcoiners, maybe the other way around. He also had other reasons to want to build a kind of a blockchain, but he was starting to think, well, I'm pointing out the reasons for these arguments and taking these things, but what if I use that as the requirements for a blockchain that doesn't have these problems? And he started thinking about blockchain design and how to solve the issues that were causing the real base cause for these problems in Bitcoin, and then later in Ethereum too. And that led him to kind of, he was actually out of Beijing for a while, and he was shooting me questions on WeChat. How would we do this? What would you do with that? Etc. And I was answering. And then in 2017 in Singapore at a friend's wedding, he was like, hey, I've built it. I built this blockchain. And I was like, what blockchain? And I hadn't realized I'd been answering specific questions that were connected so much. It's just, I wasn't sure if he was building, what he was building or anything, but yeah, help a friend out. And it didn't take too long from there for me to see exactly what had been created and to get really excited about it and agree to like join in and let's make this a real project. So we did that in 18, raised some seed, and then started to actually build a viable, network, and also our vision for Web3 on top of that at the same time. So like applications that made use of that network and avoided what we saw as some of the pitfalls where you have Web3 that's kind of just Web2 with a couple of blockchain-y things in it. And that's really taken us to, I think when we connected up, it was IDO time, and we'd kind of gotten the project to a point where we really wanted to put it out there into the community. Market was right, conditions were right. So we IDO'd in April, and then that's really just put a rocket ship under the project in terms of people's consciousness of it. It's taken it from something abstract that these guys are kind of talking about and have some, have a website you can look at it on, to, there's a real project here with muscle and a strong community, et cetera, et cetera. But in some ways, we've kind of been Web3 all along, and that's part of the reason that this launch could work now is not to say, look, we're the OGs and other people are faking it or something, but more that I think people had lost the Web3 dream in favor of basically blockchain and tokenization for a long time. And now it's come back in various forms, Polkadot and other projects trying to actually fulfill some of those other original kind of dreams for blockchain. And we're certainly very much of that mindset and that part of that group.
Yeah, that's a very cool story, very cool origin story. And you already mentioned the Web3, which especially in the last weeks, I feel is becoming more and more of a buzzword. And even Elon Musk tweeted about it more in a sarcastic way. But I think a lot of people also don't really know what Web3 actually means, right? They also don't believe that it might actually be the next big thing. But also in the crypto world, and you just said it, right? You kind of like throw around that term for many years now. So it's nothing new, but it seems like for people that are also maybe new to crypto, that's a brand new term and they don't even know what it means. So can you maybe explain from your view what Web3 means? Because I think Saito is going to be a critical infrastructure layer that contributes to make the Web3 actually a reality, right?
Yeah. I mean, so for me, the key thing is, I mean, there's sort of the part that everybody acknowledges, and it is critical, which is that you can see Web3 differentiated from Web2. The most obvious thing is when you're using Web2, the first thing you do as a user is you take your identity and you hand it to a provider and they own it. And now they own you, basically. At least the section of you that is Facebooking or is using Google or whatever, they own that. They have the ability to delete the account, to control everything about it. Web3, it's much more like the MetaMask Trust Wallet, whatever kind of experience where you're responsible for your keys and you're interacting with the system via those keys, and you can have, and maintain as many identities as you want for whatever purposes. Where that falls down, I think the other part that you need to have like true Web3 is you kind of need Web3 all the way down. And what I mean by that is if you look at something like Uniswap, I've got the keys part happening, right? So I can go and use Uniswap to exchange ERC20 tokens or whatever with a set of keys that I've created. And we could just, if we wanted to do it, we could have I don't know, if we lived in a share house, we could mint a token for our household and share it and transact that way. And no one could stop us. But we're still relying on the Uniswap project to run the servers and the infrastructure. And they still have outsized power because they do that. Now, you can go and get the Uniswap code somewhere, and theoretically, if they went away, someone else could spin up Uniswap, 2 of some kind, or they've got to be 2, but second coming.
Sushi swap.
And sushi swap, whatever. And people could go and start again there. But realistically, for your average user, can they really do that? Like if your average user is in that scenario, and the provider, if Uniswap just says, well, we're killing V2 completely and we're moving all to V3, it's very hard for the end users to say, well, okay, like I'll move away. It's there's still a power imbalance, and no accusations or anything at the Uniswap guys are doing a great job at Uniswap, but it's kind of the first steps towards a full Web3, but it's not really there. And to have that full Web3, what you need is complete decoupling of every piece of the stack. So the marketplace should be peer-to-peer genuinely, right? Which means I'm running an app and you're running an app that lets us Uniswap between each other, right? And the chain is used to do things like send out messages to say, I'm selling USDT and I want Ethereum, and I broadcast that on the chain somehow, and you independently pick that up. And then we have the ability to swap between any number of apps that let us use that swapping protocol, right? And if we want to have data storage, we do that separately somewhere else. So if I want to keep my transaction records, etc., I use software that stores them locally for myself and I back them up somewhere, or I can go to a service provider. But the service I get from that provider is completely standardized. So I could do it somewhere else. So the protocol and the provider are all separated. And I think that's somewhere we can get to. And it seems hard to imagine, but the benefit behind all of that is you get real Web3. Both sides win. Users can just drop a product and pick up a better one if there's a better one. But also developers and companies can compete just by being better. Right? And so when people hear all of the stuff I've said, they might think, oh, gee, it's like a lot of work. And, I like the internet. What's wrong with that? Why do you want to go to all this effort? And it seems like it will be flakier or something. But I think what they're not seeing, if you think that, is the huge difference in vibrancy. Imagine if Twitter or Facebook or Google or whatever was all on open standards and anyone anywhere could develop a client to speak those languages. Right? The software you'd have in your hands would be way cooler and do so much more, because anyone who just gets how you like to do these things, right, can build something and find even just a small market of people who say, yeah, I want to use Michael's Twitter client because it's better. Right? And Twitter started that way. They used to just have the API and you could do tweeting from anything. And they kind of wanted people's fridge to be able to tweet if that's what you wanted. And they shut that all down because to monetize it, they needed the control. And to me, that's the exciting thing about Web3 is once you get those pieces in place and you enable that, the ability to have competition and a real open marketplace and for creativity to start winning market share goes through the roof, because the business models can be completely flipped on their head. Small user bases can fund perfectly good software, and that will just mean that we have so much more choice and so much more innovation in everything we see on the web. And so that's what really excites us and drives us at Saito, is that just the sheer possibilities that come out of like real Web3 when you get there.
Yeah, and I think it's really, really important to understand that not just because there's a cryptocurrency, it automatically means, oh, this is Web3, right? Like you said, there's a lot of different layers to it underneath that people, especially with a non-tech background, don't even figure out or find out or don't even know about. I think one of the things, and that's also kind of like the core, basically the one-liner of Saito is that you guys are resolving the Infura problem, right? And Infura is one of the most, actually, I think they have a monopoly basically, right? In terms of getting access. It's kind of like a gateway to the Ethereum network. It's implemented everywhere, and on Uniswap and MetaMask, right? All these things. So can you maybe define the problem that Infura has? I remember like whenever Infura is down, everything is down, right? You can't really access the Ethereum chain. So from a user perspective, it's pretty easy to see that. But can you talk a little bit about what's the actual problem here? What's the challenge? And then also in that context, what solution you guys are providing with Saito? How do you resolve it actually?
Yeah. So again, like when we say something like the Infura problem, I don't want it to like sound like we hate them, evil guys over at Infura, anything, but they're trying very earnestly to make Ethereum work. And they're doing a good job. Ethereum does work for the most part. People complain about gas fees for good reasons, but yeah, it works. The whole system works. But we've got this thing where, like, we're back to the same topic as really the last sort of question. We're in a Web3 world, and Ethereum is an open public blockchain. It meets all the criteria, but almost no one is actually putting transactions onto the Ethereum chain themselves. The great majority, 90-something%, go across an Infura server. And the reason is that the way Ethereum works, to run a server that's capable of providing the other services, things like balances and checking different things on chain and a record of transactions or something. Think of Etherscan. Those servers cost tanking great big amount of money to run. And at the moment, Joe Lubin and Consensus / Infura, they're funding all of that. Right? Early Ethereum people are spending their own money to provide that, because at the moment it's an obvious payoff to them. Increase in the, if you've got a couple of million Ethereum somewhere, increase in Ethereum's value will pay off, right? Even if you spend a lot of money to support it. But the problem is, realistically, long term, you've got two issues. One is we've just introduced a trusted third party, which was kind of what we were trying to avoid, in that we all have to trust Joe Lubin. If he decided Ethereum displeased him, he could turn everything off. He's got a financial incentive not to right now, but it's a separated one. The other thing to think is, at some point, that money's got to run out, whether it's withdrawn or it actually physically just runs out. And then Infura's still there, and you can see Infura's tinkered with different revenue models, which is fine. They're a company, they can do that. But then we've got this problem of, well, now we've got someone who has to make money, who eventually will probably be answerable to shareholders, between me and my blockchain. And they have to figure out ways to make money. And the problem is that just undermines the independence of the network. There's no way around that. And the problem you can see there is that Vitalik acknowledges this in different places too. Ethereum itself just can't pay for the resources that are needed to interact with the Ethereum chain. So Ethereum pays miners at the moment, and with two, it'll pay stakers instead. But those are the only people who get a payment out of Consensus, and it's the only thing Consensus can pay for. So you're just hoping that everything else you need is provided by a community around that, businesses and others that stand to gain by providing those things. But the problem is, because that's not in Consensus, that's just an external artificial fact, you inevitably, and we can see this in like economic studies, but it's basically understood game theory, that in those situations markets fail and you get to places where you don't want to be. In the end, what it will mean is, if Infura keeps running, it's going to need to charge fees to make money, and it's going to do things to people's transactions that they may not like, because it's got to optimize its profitability. And that's a threat to Ethereum being useful at all. So this problem isn't one that Infura created, it's actually one that they've attempted to solve. And they've been so successful in their attempt that they've become the single picture of it, and you can name the problem after them. But the problem exists in Ethereum, and Infura is the bandage that's on the problem. And that's why we're calling it the Infura problem. But this is actually basically true for Bitcoin as well, and for all networks that can't pay for the basic infrastructure. So I mentioned Vitalik talks about rent and other things to say, well, okay, we've got we've got chain size problems. Maybe we should introduce some hard-coded rent fee to pay for that. Bitcoin, they have a thing where they say, they take a really interesting opposite, BTC take the opposite thing, and they say, well, no, we want volunteers to run the network, so we can't scale. We mustn't scale, because any scale means it's too big for volunteers to run. So they see the same problem, and they say, instead of having an Infura, we want to stay a volunteer network, and we're going to stay at the scale that the volunteer group can pay for. And this is something that we tackle head on in Saito, but it's basically built into proof of work or proof of stake or any other proof of type consensus mechanism that doesn't attack the idea of how do we pay for nodes, pay for the network itself.
Very interesting, and thanks for explaining that so comprehensively around the Infura story. Do you think then that this is kind of that at one point Ethereum is going to hit a dead end with that? Because I think Ethereum and Bitcoin both have different goals, right? Bitcoin kind of like is already that store of value narrative, whereas Ethereum needs to scale because it wants to be the internet computer, right? It wants to be the base layer for eventually millions of applications on top of it, right? So it has to scale, and it has to be fully decentralized, right? Otherwise, you could get Joe Lubin, who is also one of the co-founders of Ethereum itself, right? In a courtroom, and you could figure things out there. So if he would be this kind of like single point of failure, so what do you think? Is that kind of like a threat? Is there no way out for Ethereum, or do you think there's ways for Ethereum to kind of like by itself fix this, or maybe through something like Saito from the outside?
So, I mean, two kind of ways of approaching it. I think it's intractable, like I said, without serious changes to consensus in Ethereum that I would recommend that would essentially make it much more like Saito. With the kind of acceptance in the Ethereum community of the scalability trilemma and saying we're not going to attack these fundamental issues, you're always stuck in their triangle. And what you can do is look for ways to ease the pain. So what I think we'll see is less and less happening on the Ethereum chain itself, and more of the activity being moved away just to cryptographic signatures, and then only a minimum being put on chain. You can see that that's the Bitcoin answer with Lightning. That's exactly what they're doing. So we'll see that kind of thing have to happen if Ethereum can grow. They've also, they're great. Technically, they're amazing, right? They're doing some pretty, formidable stuff with optimistic rollups and so forth, but they're really just optimizing, and they might get a 1x or 5x, out of those things, but they can't solve this basic problem. So I don't think Ethereum's going anywhere anytime soon. It's going to be a place for high-value tokens, fungible or otherwise, for a long time. But I think we might see, much less happening on the Ethereum chain itself over time, just because if it's too popular, it just jams up and you get these huge costs, and they don't really have a way to sort that out. We think, for instance, that moving forward, we're not going to kind of compete head on with Ethereum. We can actually be very helpful by providing simple ways for developers to take load that needs the PKI, the public broadcast aspects of the blockchain with cryptographic security, and move as much of the transient kind of transactional stuff onto Saito, and just have Ethereum do what it does well, hold the tokens, move the tokens. And that's possible in Saito because our transaction size isn't limited. So you could put a whole stack of Ethereum transactions into one Saito transaction. And we've actually built a proof of concept payment side channel like Lightning for Ethereum on Saito, on an early version of Saito testnet to show this was possible. And that's one of the things we'll go into where we're heading next, but demonstrating how easy that is and building toolkits and ways for developers to do that quickly on top of Saito is a huge part of what's coming up in this next year. And that will be to show how we can actually be that infrastructure layer you mentioned for Web3, where Saito's not necessarily going to get into the token game or those sorts of things. We have no EVM, and that's not a part of the base layer design. So we're not competing there. What we can do is provide a way to solve these problems and get infrastructure that's independent behind Ethereum, but also Polkadot, Solana, anything else. And so that's kind of where we see ourselves fitting into that moving forward.
Can you talk maybe on from an architectural standpoint how Saito is built? Is it on its own sovereign blockchain? Is it a protocol? How can people build on it? Maybe you can talk a little bit about that so that we can get an insight of how things are working from an architectural standpoint, and also what is that unique feature that Saito has that any other chain doesn't have?
Yep. So from a design perspective, from a consensus mechanism perspective, Saito is a wholly new approach to blockchain. It's not proof of work, proof of stake. Saito consensus attacks the whole question of how do you make a blockchain from scratch. And it moves, the first thing to search for was how do we get something, every blockchain essentially needs something to prevent random block creation. You need to make block creation difficult. Burning stuff is basically proof of work. Threat of losing your stake is proof of stake. With Saito, we said, well, the only thing that's internal to the network, and this is important because it makes it robust and lets you pay for things, is user fees. So we had to find a way to distribute user fees to the whole P2P network and build a consensus mechanism out of that. The key thing moving from that design principle to, say, a developer who wants to build is the result of that is that nothing should be hard-coded in Saito, rather everything has a market price. So we don't have a block size question or a transaction size question. It just turns into a transaction price. You put however much you like into transactions, you're just going to have to pay for that space on chain. So you have to find a node that wants to take that transaction from you, so you'll have to pay the appropriate fee for its size. So obviously you can be wasteful. You put a DVD into a transaction, you're going to pay a lot of money. But what it means is, as a developer, you've got access to these key features of blockchain that allow Web3, as we were describing it before, things that people don't concentrate on a lot, like universal broadcast. When people first saw Bitcoin, if Bitcoin was the first thing people saw, you probably have a really strong memory of this. You realize I just sent money from a key to another key. There's no one in between. And you suddenly get this funny feeling of wait, I really did that. And people have kind of dropped that as this really important fundamental feature of blockchain, but that's in some ways what it's all about. The ability to universally send and universally receive. I can send a message to any key without any permission because it's going to be broadcast to everyone. And anyone can receive a message to themselves just by owning the private key. They can grab it. So that means people can encrypt transactions. They can do all sorts of things. And just having that provided by Saito with these arbitrarily large transactions means a whole world of different kinds of application design come into play. Where that's going to be exciting for people in crypto is, like I mentioned, side channels, but you can also imagine something like an NFT auction. With the current models are all actually Web2 auctions. They're off-chain, right? You could build a site that does it on-chain on some of the cheaper chains that would allow for the transaction costs. But do you really want to fill a blockchain that's permanent with thousands of bids? And do people really want to pay $20,000 in fees between a lot of them just for one auction? What you could do in Saito is put all of those transactions into one Saito transaction and then just have the software say, we'll put the winning one, the biggest one, on chain.
Mm-hmm.
So you can build something on Saito that's genuinely Web3. There's no, it's peer-to-peer. Messages just going on chain. People can just add their bids on the Saito chain, and then the winning one will win. One transaction on the Ethereum network, or Solana, or whatever it is. And that kind of, I think that's a really powerful combination. You could build a layer 2 on Saito with a dedicated purpose, like having an EVM and running its own tokens, but it will work just as well with other chains, whatever they are. So that's the real call, I think, for developers. It's one of the huge things for developers is you suddenly can use much more traditional methods to develop, because you can just put data into things, into the transactions. And so you can work a bit like an API. I can just dump information for you. I can send moves in a game. I can send a business transaction, anything I like, to you on the blockchain. So the development is quite easy, but I'm getting proper Web3 when I do that. So our sense of how things will move forward is that EVM chains and things that need to be a permanent record will stay along kind of the common models, but the transactional things will move onto, blockchains like Saito, of which there really is Saito right now, to keep the web, to provide a Web3 underpinning for those token networks and other things. So keep them Web3 by supporting them in that way.
Awesome. Yeah. Maybe you can talk a little bit about where you guys currently stand, and also since the last time we made this interview with David in April, what were some of the major achievements that you guys had in the past 6 months, and what are you mostly excited about that's happening right now?
I mean, the big things that we've been doing are building team and building the community. Our biggest success, I think, has to just be looking at the community right now and seeing the amount of contribution and value we're getting out of them. And that's really vital to a project like us. I mean, that's what made Bitcoin originally. It's what got the crypto industry up and running, was people who got involved because they cared and they wanted to know more about what was going on. So I think that has to be our shining light. Number one achievement is that the ideas that power Saito are becoming more broadly held, and more people are understanding what we're trying to achieve. And that's kind of step one. At the same time, we have completed the Web3 Foundation grant. And that's really important because we did want to contribute the code that we contributed to the Web3 ecosystem and to the foundation on their side, but it also paved the ground for actually demonstrating what I've just been talking to you about, where we added .ecosystem tokens to our game suite, and people can see exactly how you can execute what I was talking about there, where you can be playing poker on Saito and use like West End Polkadot testnet tokens as your chips in the game. And that's a demo, but I think it shows the power of what I was just talking about. At the same time, in the last 6 months, we've done a lot of behind the scenes dev work, which we've kind of been calling the Rust consensus, or getting Rust onto the network. And that really comes about because we kind of came up with these. There's some precursor pieces that came out when we started building the kind of heavy data center ready Rust node code. The original versions of the network use things like JavaScript for the blocks. So they use JSON rather for the blocks and those sorts of things. And it's clear that any like industrial level blockchain needs to be able to do that in binary. So we've put through a lot of these key pieces, the kind of moving the network over to the kind of new breed of client. That's just come through this month. And I think that opens up next year to two really big pieces of development. One is getting token persistence on these data center ready Rust nodes, which gives us a network that's kind of bulletproof and can scale way beyond anything that's happening now. And it also puts us in a good position to start building the developer infrastructure and the general toolkit around incorporating third-party cryptos into Saito applications, like I've just been saying. That then can also tie into a really solid program of outreach, where one of the things we've discovered about kind of communicating what Saito does and the best audiences for that, it's often just connecting with other projects and other communities and sharing what we do and showing how we can be helpful. For instance, with Elrond, the first kind of couple of months after the idea, by far and away the biggest move on the dial, a kind of needle moving event, was just partnering with Elrond and proposing what we've been building, because they're a mature community with a lot of people who are deeply interested in the kind of things that we're trying to achieve at Saito. And so our kind of goal is to get that out and to integrate more into the whole ecosystem, let people know what we're doing, and start building things together. So that, I think, is really the kind of key stuff we're excited about over the next year. And that's what we've been building, like since IDEO. That's what we've just been building these stepping stones and these foundation stones for, so that we're kind of ready to explode into the coming year.
Yeah, maybe you can talk a little bit more about the Web3 grant. I think that was that's always quite a process to even get that. I think for those that don't know, I think the Web3 Foundation is funding a lot of projects in the Polkadot and Kusama ecosystem, and also kind of like funding Polkadot and Kusama itself in that sense. So is it also safe to say, maybe you can talk a little bit about that process and also your collaborations now? What access to resources do you have with them? And is Saito now becoming more part of the Polkadot ecosystem and the Kusama ecosystem, or is that just like one angle from which you guys are tackling this?
Yeah, so I mean, this ties into everything we've been talking about. And the basic thing is, what we got the grant for was largely the game engine we built to power games on the Saito network, which we built in no small part to prove out the development strategies and techniques you need to build the genuine Web3 I've been talking about. So a really solid example of that, and maybe this ties it down, makes it more concrete for people who are listening. A really great example of that is simply this question. If you and I are going to play a card game, let's say poker, peer-to-peer between pieces of software with no central server or anything, how do we do a card deal? Right? And that was a real challenge to solve. It was really fun for 2 or 3, maybe even 4 days in Cytoplex. We're wandering around with a whiteboard trying to say, well, I encrypt everything, and then I shuffle those, and I send all of that to you, and then you encrypt that, and then I get back, and then how do now it doesn't work. And then going back to Googling, like, someone must have solved this problem. And on day 3 or 4, we came across mental poker, and it was hidden because the solution was called mental poker. It was the solution came from the guys who did RSA encryption, an Israeli team in the late 70s, I think. And they called it mental poker because they couldn't imagine computers on a network. So they were literally saying, how could you do it over the phone? So like you and I call each other and we play a game of cryptographically provably fair poker over the phone. And it's a cryptographic routine. So we took Web3 seriously, and we said, well, you can't just go and ask somebody external to manage the card dealing, because it's not Web3, right? It gives them ownership of the game. If you're going to do it genuinely P2P, we need to solve this problem. And this problem will come up again and again and again, because it doesn't matter if it's game or a piece of business software that needs to choose who goes first in an auction or a process, right? You have to be able to find cryptographically secure ways of doing that peer-to-peer. We built a lot of that into the game engine because we were like trying to build not just Saito, but a demonstration stack of how you can use this kind of network to build a proper Web3. So when we started interacting with the Web3 Foundation, we were like, well, that's a thing we can open source and share with anyone in the space, because it's not the core Saito code, it's a technique that improves the ability of people to develop proper peer-to-peer Web3 applications. So that was the basis of the application. It was actually quite fun because they had the same response we had when we did the original application. When we did the original coding, we submitted the application, and someone came back and said, that's not possible. It was the first review we got. And we said, well, yes, it is. It's not our solution. It's the RSA guys. Here's the paper. We've coded that out. This is really useful for Web3 games, but anybody else. We'd like the grant just to make that available to demonstrate how you could use that in the Polkadot ecosystem. So it's really quite a collaborative thing. We wanted to make sure, we didn't want to get in and kind of, you could, with the right approach, use the grant system to kind of sail in on their banner and get a lot of publicity with the branding and the cachet. And we wanted to collaborate. It's obviously an important part of collaboration is the recognition we get for that, but we wanted to make sure we contributed something useful. So that seemed like a really good contribution, and it also let us build the underpinnings for being able to go to not just the Polkadot ecosystem, but blockchains in general, and say, here's an example of the architecture and the style we're talking about. This is a good way to collaborate and move forward. It was a really good process for us. The Web3 community in general and the Polkadot Web3 Foundation community are obviously the right people for us to be talking to. They're interested in the Web3 aspect of blockchain, not just the cryptocurrency side of things. And so it was a really good collaboration. It put us in front of a really big community of people who are dedicated and interested in the concepts. And we hope to keep extending that. So the grant, we got the grant in about a month and a half ago, and it's been fully accepted now. Nice. So that's we've wound that up. That's great to have done. And you can go to /.arcade on Saito.io and try it out. There's running code. And we'll be extending that. As I said, that's one of the big things to do next year, is to take that past the Polkadot ecosystem and generalize it for Elrond, BCH, whoever wants to come along.
Cosmos.
Cosmos, BSC. But absolutely, we want to be collaborating with people and bringing the features that we have to their stack. So that's really kind of the relationship there. We're not a formal part of the Polkadot /Web3 in any way, because we're also, they're very cautious about about saying that. We've collaborated with them on this one piece, and we're not a parachain or anything like that, because we are this fundamentally new design. So we like to see ourselves as collaborators, and hopefully one day we'll be on equal footing size-wise and maybe even bigger. But that's the kind of relationship between us and the Web3 folk.
No, that's I think that's go ahead.
Well, I just want to say to their credit, and to Gavin Wood's credit really for kind of seeing it and setting it all up, the split between the Web3 Foundation and Polkadot, although they're very closely aligned, is genuine, and the Web3 Foundation has genuine interest in pushing a Web3 agenda. And so credit to them for, working with us on the grant and for seeing the value in it, and for supporting general ecosystem work like that. So.
No, I think that's also the right ideology that we need to have in crypto, is to be open and promote and push and fund also great ideas that are beneficial to the broader goal. Because I think in this crypto revolution, which is only going on for, if you count the start of Bitcoin, 12 years now, we're all kind of like, I feel, in the same boat, trying to achieve the same thing. But along the way, people, like you said in the beginning, right, they fork off, and then you have this community and that community, and then they try to fight each other. And it's all pointless, I think, because eventually we all want the same thing, right? I was just mentioning Cosmos because I know a lot of cosmonauts are watching this video, because this channel is predominantly Cosmos specific. And I think it would also be interesting, I don't know if you have checked it out yet, I think the Interchain Foundation, which is kind of like the Web3 Foundation counterpart in the Cosmos world, as well as Tendermint, which is which is basically parity for Cosmos. I think they also have a lot of like grant programs for actual builders, right? That don't want to cloud chase and jump on the bandwagon of the hype, right? So that would also probably be something interesting for you guys.
Yeah, the last time I had a serious conversation with a cosmonaut would have been 2018 in Berlin. I went to the Berlin Blockchain Week, and there was a really cool meetup there. And I spoke to some great guys. One of them from Chile, I think. So it's been a while since I've looked properly into the ecosystem. I mean, that's actually one of the things we've learned this year is kind of all through the big long last winter, we had our heads down, just working. And actually during the kind of IDO process and getting out and about and talking to different communities, I've realized how much I'd missed.
There's a lot.
Because it's just moving so fast. So
I don't know.
Really.
Yeah, I think actually I was also at that meetup in Berlin back then. There was a whole week of events, and I think I was also there, but I didn't even know anything about Polkadot or Cosmos. But if you, do you remember?
That was actually the one Polkadot launched, I think.
Yes, I remember
at Funkhaus.
Yes.
I actually missed that. I was so dumb now. I realized I could have been there. I went to something else at that session. But
if you talk about the Chilean, I think it might be Federico, who is now the co-founder of FMOS. And like you said, man, there's like a lot of things going on there. Similar to, with Polkadot, obviously, they launched their first parachains now. The whole ecosystem is coming to life, and they grew exponentially over the past few months, and so did Cosmos. And I think those ecosystems that are also caring a lot about interoperability, connecting ideas, projects, blockchains, I think this is the future. And another completely different aspect to the Web3, to what we talked about throughout this interview. But as we wrap things up, you can share your thoughts on the biggest, most exciting things that are coming now for 2022, and also what the community can do for you guys.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest things that we can do that we're on at the moment, and I was actually talking to some people today about possibly joining the project in roles around community, because actually we're behind the community. They're being so active and so engaged that we're not necessarily like helping coordinate them all and bring them together. So getting involved, hopping in Telegram or the Discord channels, and seeing what's going on. We've got some great projects going on. One of the biggest things is actually multilingual. We were talking before the call about like language and trying to get your language up to a certain level. I mean, I'm always amazed at Chinese people and Europeans, etc., who are I've got to stop myself and remember they're doing all of this in the second or third language. So one of the things we're really seeing great growth in is getting involved in multilingual communities, getting things like white papers, translated, and working on kind of materials and stuff around that. That's a huge thing that's going on in the space at the moment. Spanish, Arabic have been growing a lot, and that's really important to us. And then I think the other thing is contributing to debate and discussion, getting people interested. We're still at a point where sharing the ideas is the most important thing we're doing. So those language groups, etc., are a big part of that. Getting involved in discussion, debate, getting involved on Twitter and kind of following and looking, amplifying things like this discussion. I think you'll be pleased to see that, like, the red square, the red card army on Twitter boosting this when it goes out, because there's a lot of people who really care and they want to get that word out. So that's really the number one thing. There are some other things. I mean, any holders can go and provide liquidity on Pancake if they want. There's like earning opportunity. We have lots of little different ways of being involved. And what I'm hoping to do, and one of the big things for the coming year, is to improve our ability to get people to start participating and have better resources for community to help them find a place to be and to kind of collaborate and be part of what we're doing. Yeah,
and I think there's also a pool on SIFchain, right? Which is also
absolutely SIFchain, who have, amongst other things, I think the most what's the most unique? Most unique for me. They have genuinely unique graphic design. Love those guys.
Oh, yeah.
They have such a different, there's such a different presence in the space, and I love them. If for nothing else for that, but they're actually doing a great job. Yeah. So yes, there is a pool on Rowan, Saito, and they've got a stablecoin Saito on there as well, I think now. So yeah, for
and
that community, that's another bridge.
It has like some 3-figure APR on there, like hundreds, because they have this program going on, right, with 100%. Maybe by the time some people are watching this, it's already over. But I think it's interesting and very, very exciting cross-chain decks out there as well. But yeah, thanks for sharing all this. I will try. I always say that, sometimes I forget it, but this time for sure I will link everything under this video, the website, your Twitter account, the Saito Twitter account, the Telegram group, so people that want to learn more can get involved. And yeah, I think we can do this again sometime maybe February or March, to get the latest and hottest updates about Saito. And yeah, thanks for doing this.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for quality questions and a great space to be talking about Saito. And I'd love to do that. It'd be great to come back in 3 months. It's one of the cool things about the job is we've got various things that sort of semi-regular, and being able to sit down every month, 6 weeks, and have to remember what's happened in between is a really rare opportunity to get out of the daily work and see just how much we're getting done. So I'd love to come back and catch you guys up in 3 months or so.
Yeah, we'll do that. Thanks, man.
Cool. Thanks, Michael.